right, we'll go ahead and let people in and we will get started. If you are watching this live or you are watching this in the future, welcome either way to another edition of Community Capital Live. I am your host, Joel Skeen, host of the Mindful Marketplace show on bizradio.us. And Community Capital Live really is the place where we get to dive deep on the really innovative, the really new and kind of emerging markets of local and impact investing, specifically on the funds that people can put their money into to impact their local communities, not just send their money up to Wall Street. So we have an excellent panel today, and we have an excellent guests lined up. Our guests today are Betty Francisco and Aliana Pinheiro from the Boston Impact Initiative, and our partner organizations. This entire thing, we can't do it alone. This is a partnership between the Main Street Journal, between Impact Alpha, Neighborhood Economics, the Eagle Market Street Development Corporation, and the Mindful Marketplace. And I want to introduce our panel that we have today that will be helping me ask the tough questions and the good questions that we want to hear. And if you are live, make sure to put your questions in the chat as well. But our panelist today includes the one and only Michael Schuman, author of several books on local investing, including Put Your Money Where Your Life Is. He is also the publisher of the Main Street Journal, the best place to get information on local investing. We also have with us Kevin Jones, who is the co-founder of SOCAP Impact Investing Conference, as well as Neighborhood Economics. Check out Neighborhood Economics and all the good work they do on convening impact investors and community members. We also have Jasmine Rogers from the Eagle Market Street Development Corporation. We talked about their community fund not too long ago here in Asheville, North Carolina. And we are also joined, like I said, by our guests, which we will get to now, Betty Francisco and Aliana Pinheiro from the Boston Impact Initiative. So, Betty, I'd like to start. Thank you so much for being on here today. Could you tell us just a little bit about how Boston Impact Initiative really came together?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me and Aliana today. We're really excited about sharing our story. So BII was actually founded by Deborah Fries and her father, Michael Fries. Some of you may be familiar with her work. And I have the good fortune of having come on board 3 years ago to BII. But the origin story is back in 2013, Deborah was really looking at our local ecosystem and, which is Boston. And we often think of Boston as being, like the hub of life sciences and tech and really resource rich. But the reality is we have one of the highest levels of income inequality and racial wealth gaps in the country. In 2015, there was a report by the Federal Reserve Bank that showed that the median net worth of white families was approaching $250K. While the net worth of a Black family was $8. So $8. And for the Latino community, specifically for, say, Dominican families, it was negative. So what it showed was these huge disparities, right, in wealth and who gets to participate, particularly participate in business ownership. And so Deborah and Michael launched a pilot fund in 2013 that was to test this concept of place-based investing, leveraging integrated capital. So blended capital, for us, it leverages all the tools in the toolbox between grants, debt, equity, and using really creative finance, right, to structure transactions to best meet the needs of business owners and entrepreneurs. And using an investment approach that's rooted in relationship, in trust, in recognizing the power of community leaders and movement builders to envelop an entrepreneur with resources that often they may not have had access to in the past. So the focus was on supporting entrepreneurs that were under-resourced, so BIPOC entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, often from lower income backgrounds. And so that first pilot fund invested $3 million into 30 enterprises, very sector agnostic. So there's, companies that are in manufacturing, in the arts, and professional services, construction, they run the gamut. But what it really showed is that these investments are no more riskier than other mainstream investments, that we can invest in our communities and we can drive economic justice through our investment activity. And I will let Aliana talk a little bit about how we think about impact and economic justice. But just to sort of finish the journey, in 2017, Deborah wanted to launch an external fund. We saw that there was power in this investment approach. And so Fund One was launched in 2017 with external investors. We created an entity called a charitable loan fund. At the time, it was one of maybe 3 charitable loan funds in the country, with this focus on economic justice. So today we have hundreds and hundreds of impact funds that have this investment thesis. But back then, there was impact investing at the most basic level. Very few funds had a thesis around economic justice and racial equity. And so Fund One raised $7 million from 115 investors, fully deployed into 50 enterprises. And we're now on Fund Two. We're raising 20 million. We've already raised about 12.6 from 170 investors. And you might ask, why so many investors? And this is the beauty of BII, is because we allow non-accredited investors to participate in our fund. We wanted to give community members the chance to own, a share of a fund that's investing in their companies in their own community. So I'm really proud and excited to be part of the journey.
Yeah, I know that particular piece of it, of the non-accredited investors being able to um, to participate, is a big passion, and from the work and a lot of what Michael's work has been about. Michael, I'm wondering if you have anything you'd like to follow up with there.
Yeah, can you tell us about some of the companies that you have invested in, to just give us a flavor for um, the work you're doing, and maybe a little bit about the size of the investments? Is it loan? Is it equity? Is it some combination? And what's the repayment terms around it?
Sure, I'll take that question, Michael. Thank you. So we invest in businesses, as Betty mentioned, where we continue to be sector agnostic. We have a few impact lenses that we're looking through. So we want businesses that are centering economic justice, either in their ownership structure, their opportunity structure, so jobs, procurement practices. Then we're looking at climate resilience. So both sustainability of any business, but then also specific solutions that can actually make especially environmental justice communities more resilient to climate change. And finally, we're centering worker ownership and power. So that can be worker ownership, community ownership, governance, some sort of governance structure. And by the way, not every business will check off every one of these boxes, these impact screens, but it's a lens that we look through as we vet the companies that we invest in. One example that I'll give you is it's a Fund One investment. It's called Nuevo Dia Adult Day Health. It is a Latino-owned business based in Boston, on the Jamaica Plain Roxbury line, and they are serving Latino elders in our community. They found that among their own community and their own families, that there was really a problem of cultural competency when it came to caring during the day for elders that really can't be at home alone all day. And so they've created this center. I've been to visit a few times. It is super vibrant. It's a fun place to be. They have Zumba classes. They have doctors and nurses that come in and do the medical appointments there. They have all kinds of resources. They send folks home with food on the weekends. And their procurement practices, by the way, they're procuring almost 100% of everything that's the vendors and suppliers are from diverse-owned businesses locally owned in our community. So they're not only a wonderful locally owned Latino business, but they're also working with others there. That is a business that is you know, doing really well and looking to grow. You know, and you can hear from the description, it doesn't check every one of those impact lenses that I mentioned, but it does check several. You asked about the different types of capital that we provide. We provide debt, equity, revenue-based financing, kind of lines of credit and receivable financing. And I'll say that we don't kind of provide this list to the business and say, okay, you choose what you think you need or you make this application. We talk to the business, understand what their needs are in that moment, and then see how we can work with them to structure something that will meet them where they are. And sometimes they come back. I mean, you know, we talk to them throughout the year, you know, check in with them, and they'll come back to us in, you know, a year, 18 months and say, now I have this different need. And so before I needed revenue-based financing, but now I need a different type of loan or an equity investment. So we try to follow our businesses through over time and help them grow in a way that's works for them and is sustainable for them.
That's great. And if I can ask, I know from early discussions that I had with Deborah that she wanted to set up different tiers of investment so that the deeper pockets, foundations, for example, would take the greatest risk. Is that built in? And maybe take a moment to describe that.
Yeah, so we have in both Fund 1 and 2, there's different types of notes, right? So our investors are lending us money. So the community note is the one that is available to non-accredited investors. And so what we did is we flipped, right, the traditional notions of who should benefit from risk and return. So when you think about it, those that are accredited, wealthy, right, typically in our financial system get the better return, the higher interest rate, maybe a shorter holding period. So we flipped that. So the community note has a shorter term. In Fund 2, it's a 5-year term, and it's a 5% interest rate. And if that investor decides to renew that note for another 5 years, because our Fund 2 is a 10-year fund, they would get a 7% interest rate. Now, let's compare that to the accredited investor notes. There are two. The Solidarity Note, which is a 10-year note, it generates 3%, or the Philanthropic Note, which is geared more to foundations or investors that really just want return of principal or not so focused on the rate of return. That's a 1% note, but it's a 10-year, right, hold. And so what it does, it flips who benefits from the risk and return, and it puts more return into the hands of those least able to bear risk, right? For you think about non-accredited investors, they may not be able to hold that note as long. So they get to exit a little earlier, but they have the option of staying and they get rewarded for staying by getting the higher rate. That community note represents 5% of the $20 million fund. So it's $1 million out of the total of 20. And we have about, I would say 40 or so community investors that range from the minimum amount, which is $1,000. So it's a very accessible entry point, up to 25,000.
Right. So let me ask one more question and then I'll pass it on to Kevin and others. I think what's really interesting about your model is you're one of the few community investment funds that is on a second fund, and the second fund is larger, significantly larger than the first fund. I know that the first fund, because there is a lot of charitable money in it, the business model, you know, required charitable support for, say, technical assistance. Do you find with the larger scale model, it's going to become closer to paying for itself?
So we've done an analysis of when does it approach the point where it can pay for itself. It's probably closer to a $50 million fund.
50 million, okay.
50, not 20. So here's why, right? So in order for us to hold true to our mission, which is providing catalytic capital to our entrepreneurs, we're lending at rates that are 7% in this market, right? Where other investors are 10 or more. On our equity investments, we cap our returns between 1.5 and 3x, right? So in order to do that, our cost of capital needs to be relatively low. So we're not demanding these high returns from our investments. So, and I remember Deborah saying this, like the model is always going to be reliant on some philanthropy, because philanthropy has a role to play in building community wealth, given, the roots of philanthropy, which have often come from extractive practices. So if you think about regenerative finance or moving us more towards, a solidarity economy that redistributes wealth, there has to be a role for philanthropy, and people want to give, right, and want to invest in funds like BII. So there's a point at which, even at a $20 million fund, if all our investments did well, and we bake in a pretty significant level of reserve, because we know that not all of them, right, will get to, an exit in the traditional sense or become, fully sustainable. Some might close, some might not repay their loan, or we may not recoup a return. So in order to do that, right, we have to use a subsidy, which often comes from philanthropic sources for operations. So the thing that we have gotten better at, I would say over time, is looking at pockets of funding that help support the investment work and our field building work. So on the philanthropic side, there are technical assistance grants, right? So we do get a grant from a government agency here called Mass Growth Capital. They support small business technical assistance. So that helps us to offset some of our costs to do the pre-investment technical assistance that our businesses need. And there are funders that are willing to pay for TA, right? So that it prepares our businesses for capital access. So that's one way to subsidize it. The other thing we've tried in Fund 2, sorry to get very technical, is it's hard for funds like ours to charge a management fee, because that's how venture funds make money, right? They charge a management fee and they take carry. Because our return to investors is low, we didn't feel it was appropriate to charge a management fee. But what we did with Fund 2 is we're taking a deployment fee out of the total committed capital at the end of every year. During the active investment years, it's 1%. And it gives us a little bit of funding, right, so that we can support our investment team operations. It does not come out of the investor's pocket, right? The investors get their return, 3%, 1%, or 5%. But it helps us float, right, the operations until we exit all the positions in the fund.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. One of the things I've liked about the Boston Impact Investment Initiative is that it's been about ceding power and a reversal of power and engaging the community just in its basic DNA. And that is a message that works for a lot of folks, but then you have to reach people who are not the true believers who are getting on board. And I wonder how you reach out to folks for whom this is a new way of thinking. They may have known about some of your case studies and things, but how are you telling the story to more mainstream folks who might not know the word impact investing and might not know what community investing is? You're one of the successes that you're going with a second fund and it's doubling, but how have you expanded on the base of folks who care?
Yeah, so I think it's been more of a taking a learning and sharing our learning approach, right? So in addition, this is a lot of the work Deborah did in addition to the investment work was, the changing hearts and minds work, right? The advisory work, working with whether it's family offices, high net worth individuals, foundations even, right? To share our approach, but to also push and challenge and say, you too can do this, right? We need your capital to shift. And foundations are one really good example, right? We know foundations mostly invest their endowments into mainstream markets, Wall Street, right? Very little goes into community-based investments. But some are starting to allocate pools, like they're testing, they're playing, they're putting, allocations of capital to a program investment pool or a mission-related investment pool. And that's where funds like BII or some underlying investments can be shown to align very well with the overall mission of that foundation, right? So for example, the Boston Foundation has a PRI pool. When we have a transaction that is very aligned with the goals of the Boston Foundation around building community wealth, that pillar. And I'll give you one example. The Boston Foundation can use that pool of capital to make a PRI investment alongside BII. So when we were launching Fund 2 in 2022, late 2021, 2022, we were looking for real estate opportunities that would fit our investment criteria in Fund 2. So in addition to businesses, Fund 2 can invest 30% into what we call community owned or controlled real estate. And why? Because right now we have such a massive housing crisis in our state, but in our country, right? We have 200,000 new units that need to be built just so that we can deal with our housing crisis. But we also need to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, right? We don't want current housing to keep falling into the hands of developers that then keep raising rents and displacing people. So we said, this is where there's a big gap right now. Let's provide some of our capital to our movement leaders that are in this work, like City Life Vida Urbana, right? That does tenant advocacy and is seeing opportunities when those buildings are going up for sale. We want to be first to help tenants buy those buildings or help community organizations like a CDC acquire those to preserve affordability. So in 2021, when we were shaping Fund 2, this opportunity came along to purchase for a CDC in East Boston to purchase a portfolio of 36 buildings representing 114 units. These were in a Latino neighborhood, rapidly gentrifying. Many of the families that had lived in those units were pushed out because of the owner that had been, buying the buildings and then renting to students. So this portfolio comes on the market. It's a chance to now make this permanently affordable, but also put it in the hands of community leadership, community governance. And so that transaction was the first mixed income neighborhood trust in Massachusetts. East Boston CDC created the MINT, that it stands for Mixed Income Neighborhood Trust, stands for MINT. And it's this incredible deal that brought together capital from all, levels. So senior debt, mezzanine debt, and then what we call subordinated debt and equity from community investors. So BII participated, the Boston Foundation participated, Barr Foundation participated. Eastern Bank Foundation made their first PRI investment into this deal. And that's how you shift hearts and minds. You see the opportunity to have massive impact because now you have permanent affordability of these units forever, right? Forever. You've got community control. So the decisions around what happens, do we raise rents? Do we renovate? Is in the hands of community. And you've got, all these folks that came together in deep relationship of trust to make the deal happen because it came from our community movement leaders. So that's what helped. So, people change their minds and start to move money this way when they have the chance to join you. And that's sort of the way that we've been successful in bringing others along to invite them into some of these opportunities alongside us.
Yeah,
but
that's interesting.
Learning together, sharing opportunities with each other as well.
Right. We've done stories and we've had at our neighborhood economics conference, things like corridor initiatives and this new diversified community investment fund. Corridor initiatives like the Kensington Corridor in Philadelphia is probably the leading one, but Local Code and Rising Crenshaw and the Baltimore group. Have you looked at whole block like things that are things like the corridor initiatives to expand the fund into community owned commercial real estate beyond housing and the businesses inside?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
While we do take a local approach, and certainly a portfolio approach of, how can these businesses, even though we're sector agnostic, how can they work together? How can they complement each other? How can they buy from each other? So we are looking to create this web of relationships among our portfolio. We have not yet taken that corridor approach, and I think it's there's probably a couple reasons why, and maybe Betty wants to also add to this, but I'd say one is we've expanded from Eastern Massachusetts to all of Massachusetts. There's actually quite a dearth of investment in Western Massachusetts, Springfield area, even Central Mass. There's a ton of players in the Boston area and not enough in Central and Western Massachusetts. And so we've seen an opportunity for us to forge more relationships there and see how we can continue to build this portfolio again of connected businesses that can work together and support each other, but not necessarily in that like block by block methodology. And then we've also we work closely with partners. So an example is the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. We've collaborated on several investments with them, and sometimes we're either doing them inside Massachusetts, like the Community Purchasing Alliance of Massachusetts, or we're even going outside of Massachusetts. So we're able to do that a bit, within New England and upstate New York. We're able to do that a bit with partners, and again, making sure that there's sort of this web of relationships that continues to bring folks together. But I don't know, Betty, if you want to add anything on the corridor kind of model.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great approach, but we ourselves are not developers, right? So, but we're looking to be in relationship with developers that might be taking that approach. So, there are some, like there's a whole developers of color initiative here in Massachusetts. And there's some, right, that are looking to do that. It's a very long runway, right? Long time to develop. So while we are in conversations, it might be a year and a half from now that we actually are able to put capital in. But yes, there's, we help train emerging fund managers as well. Then there's a few that are taking on, this approach of community owned or community controlled real estate. So like in Atlanta, there's the Guild and Ground Cover, right? That is so community rooted, buying, parcels and developing them. One investment we're making in upstate New York is deeply rooted in a community that is led by immigrants and refugees, and they're buying building by building that from the city of Syracuse, and using that to create affordable housing in a place that is going to gentrify very fast, because there's a huge Micron facility coming into that area. So it's affordable today, but it won't be affordable a year from now. So letting, community leaders through, organizations that want to preserve housing for immigrant, very, very, vulnerable communities is hugely important. And they're going to adopt something like the push buffalo model.
Okay. And your relationship to the group in New York, are you an advisor? What's your role to help them? You have a lot of experience, but they're doing something else.
Oh, so we are a capital provider. We will be investing, in them. We're giving them the financing to purchase and renovate the building or a set of buildings, right? And then we also we are supporting from a technical assistance standpoint, but we have another fund there, another partner that went through our cohort program that we're in deep relationship with for this transaction.
Okay. And just a little, we're building a database of these things because it's really hard if you're around the country to know who's doing what and make it affordable. So we're working with Impact Assets or Impact Alpha rather to build that database. So let me just get a few nuts and bolts out of the way. What is your loan loss reserve? What is your default rate? And what's the average size of a loan?
So the average size of a loan is between 100 and 500,000 for small business lending. For real estate, it could be $500,000 up to 2 million, right? Because we're doing both. The loan loss, I don't know that number off the top of my head. Do you?
So the loan loss, we talked earlier about the capital stack that we have. We don't actually have a loan loss reserve in Fund 2, but we do have the philanthropic notes that are sort of the first loss capital. Betty, how large is that tranche at 20 million fully raised fund?
So
it's 6 million.
The target is 6 million, right? So that 30, I mean, it's very high, right? That 30% of the fund would have that philanthropic layer. And sometimes investors will come in with a recoverable grant, even better for us, right? Because it sits below those philanthropic notes. You know,
and then
yeah,
I was going to say the default rate is, we'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know what it is off the top of my head.
I think it's about 7% actually from our last. Yeah. So it's not as low as a CDFI. Like CDFI is a 1% or sometimes no default rates. We have a little,
and that's one of the problems with them. You know, no risk is what they call that CDFI.
Right. But we do know that there will be, so, you know, we tend to take more risk, but we do a lot of technical assistance and support. And the reality is, you know, businesses will fail, they will close, but we don't look at it from the standpoint of, oh, they failed, but rather what did they achieve during the time that they were open? And there's some great stories, even from businesses that have closed, right? The impact that they had from the standpoint of, you know, who they employed, where those employees landed, to how they changed, you know, neighborhoods because they existed. So, we don't look at it as failures.
Sure. One final thing, and I'll pass it off. On things like the adult daycare that you mentioned, with their procurement, do you measure your ecosystem impact of, you know, the buying power of your businesses and what they are in the aggregate?
So we measure, not everybody has, you know, the best records of all this, and we do try, you know, we work with our businesses. What we do measure is, you know, the percentage of businesses in the portfolio that have a policy to prioritize local, woman-owned and BIPOC-owned businesses. And then we also ask them what percentage of their spending is with those types of businesses. And I believe it was at least like 1/3 from this last, which is, you know, if you think about overall spending, you know, some people are spending mostly on equipment or other types of things that might be tough to buy from local businesses, but I believe it was about 1/3 as of 2023.
That's great. I'll pass it off either to Joel or Michael. Looks like Jasmine's not with us at the moment.
Yeah, I definitely have a couple of questions that I'd love to get into. I really love the approach. I really love the framing around how you guys are talking about things, because it definitely seems that you're questioning the assumption, or you're kind of going against the grain of what a lot of investment firms and institutional investors would do, specifically around the idea of investing into communities that other investors would look at and either not want to invest in at all, or maybe even divest from. And I'm curious if you guys have any stories that questions that assumption that people have that these communities aren't worth investing in.
Well, oh, Betty, you're on mute.
No, go ahead, you start, and then I'll think of another story. Yeah.
I was going to share, you know, I don't know if this is particularly underinvest, or I don't know if it's particularly, you know, this kind of divested, but it's a blind spot, I think, for for some investors and business owners, which is the EV market. So we have a business in our portfolio that we've invested in. It's called Eco Auto, and they are a reseller of EVs. They sell used EVs. They do a lot of education. They go to farmers markets, public libraries. They kind of have education events in neighborhoods where it's mostly people of color and lower middle income folks who might feel like EVs are for rich people. I can't afford a Tesla. That's, there are no chargers in my neighborhood. Like, why would I do that? And so they're tackling this issue from the perspective of EVs are for everyone. We need to move towards them so that we can tackle reduce the greenhouse gases of our state and really all be part of the solution. But they're not only tackling the reseller, or they're not only tackling the sales, but they're also tackling the chargers and sort of the infrastructure as well. And so educating around infrastructure, educating around and connecting folks with the right people to install their chargers. And then they're starting to work with businesses and municipalities to think about how to plan their own infrastructure and how to get chargers into places that don't have a lot of access to chargers. So that's a great example of kind of something that you might not think is like, does a community of color need this? Like, yes, we need this. And this great business has popped up because of it.
Well, one of the things I run into in this space is not that the community doesn't believe. You have that, obviously. Why should I hope is the question. But I have a lot of folks who have kind of a Thanksgiving basket seasonal philanthropy kind of thing, who don't realize that the communities that they see as needy are actually investable. And I wonder how you address some of that stuff. That I know that zip code. My God, I wouldn't put my money there. I'm afraid of that zip code. I mean, and how you address that they can pay it back. They can build assets. How you change that seasonal Thanksgiving basket mindset.
Well, I think that's been the work. I think that was Deborah Freese's work through the pilot fund and then throughout, right? That these are investable businesses. It's not just a one-time grant. That sure, a $10,000 or $20,000 grant is helpful. Like, let's do that. Let's give businesses those grants. Those are great. But these are investable businesses. These are businesses that will pay you back. And when you're forging these deep relationships with the business owners and among the business owners and with the capital providers and the business support organizations, that really helps the businesses sort of lift up and be empowered, right? It's not, I think what I've learned in the 5.5 years that I've been at BII is that it's not so much about like, oh, look what we're giving, look what we're doing, like, pat ourselves on the back. It's that folks are empowered, they're empowering themselves, and we're investing in them because these are good businesses. We're not being extractive. We're taking, again, 5 to 7% interest rate on the business loans, capping our equity returns, capping our revenue-based financing returns, all of that, but also recognizing that like this is a model where we can pay back our investors.
Right. And really, as Michael said, you're a second fund, but really you're a third fund. There was the first that the Freese family did. And so you've got a longer track record doing this than most other places, I think. So do we want to...
And I would say, part of I think our challenge for Aliana and I, now that, we are leading BII, we're now, a woman-led, Latina-led fund, right? Because Deborah, has made this transition, like that was always part of this plan, right? To transition this to a BIPOC-led organization. And so, yes, while it's fun too, we also have a lot still to prove, right? In terms of how we grow the fund, how we move from, by the way, I know, we don't always think so kindly of some CDFIs, but we are actually getting certified. We're applying to be certified as a CDFI. And part of that rationale is both to impart our approach, right? So we're like, we're gonna push our approach into this community that mostly lends, like only 3% of CDFIs do investing beyond just the regular term loan, right? That they mostly just lend. And we think we can bring our integrated capital approach to it, but we also need to grow, right? So we're trying to figure out, how do we bring, to your earlier question, how do we bring other capital into community-based investing, including banks, right? Including other private investors that want the safer bet. This is one approach to do that, right?
Yeah.
Because they won't blink giving money to a CDFI, right? But if you
Right.
don't have that, like, oh, that's riskier. So this is like a way to de-risk getting more capital so that we can continue doing this great work.
Right. Okay. Do we want to open it up, Joel, or
Yeah, if anyone out in the audience does have a question, feel free to throw it up here in the chat. I can direct to you and you can unmute. But I also wanted to hear a little bit more about, you know, I mean, obviously in our world today, affordable housing is, you know, one of the biggest issues that, you know, so many Americans are facing. And I'm really intrigued by this community ownership housing project that you guys have worked on. I'm wondering if you could unpack that that story a little bit more for us around how the community came together to make that happen.
Yeah. Do you want me to start? So the way that this is called the East Boston Neighborhood Trust, EBNT.
Okay.
It's also called the Blue Line Portfolio Acquisition. And I have to say, it's cool because it's a historic deal, right, for the city of Boston. But the way it came about, it was City Life Vida Urbana, which is actually one of our supported organizations. They have representation on our board. Mike Leba, you know, they do tenant advocacy, and they organize tenants. They were in East Boston organizing a lot of those buildings that were being purchased, right, by this developer and trying to push families out. And so City Life was doing a program called, what was it called? Not Purpose Fellows, the Purpose Fellows program back in 2021. It was City Life, it was BII, our investment director, Henry and Noel, was in the program. And then Trust Neighborhoods was also in this program. You may have heard of Trust Neighborhoods. And so the three of them looked at this transaction that came up because as I mentioned, the portfolio was put on MLS. So think about it. You're like, you know, you're looking through your regular apartments, you know, that are being sold, condos being sold on MLS, and all of a sudden you see 36 buildings up for sale altogether. You're like, wow. So the local CDC, East Boston CDC, that have been watching this massive, you know, not just gentrification, but displacement of families along a period of time, saw this opportunity and said, how can we buy this? Can we buy this? Is that even possible? So Mike Leba, you know, being deeply rooted in the East Boston community, having organized many of these buildings, started to work with the CDC and brought in Trust Neighborhoods. And that's how we learned of the transaction first. So we brought that to our investment committee, which, you know, saw this opportunity to not just support the transaction, but to deepen its impact, right? So when it first came to us, it was meant to be an acquisition to provide permanent affordability, but at say 60 to 80% AMI. And one of our board members, Lisa Owens at Hyams, you know, said, how can we go deeper? Like, how can we make it more affordable? And how can we ensure community voice? Is there opportunity for community ownership even? And so because we were working with a set of really community rooted players, they were so amenable, right? Trust Neighborhoods, the CDC were so amenable to figuring that out. So this took a lot of players. It took the city of Boston. It took the Boston City Council, right, to pass a resolution to be able to provide a deep subsidy to this transaction. So the city of Boston put in $12 million in subsidy for this deal to happen. It needed 6 to 8 million in subordinated debt and equity. So that's where BII came in and brought a lot of other impact investors, right, to learn about the transaction and support it. We did a funder mobilization call with all the players, and we shared this opportunity, right, with investors. I remember this call because I'd never seen anything like it. Like it was just, you know, coming together to make it, to say yes and make this possible. And then in the work of the deal, right, Trust Neighborhoods was able to create a structure that did allow for us to participate, right? So they were really flexible in our fund because we have a 10-year fund, right? Ideally, they wanted a 15-year payback. And so they adjusted for us. They were able to get in other, you know, investors, like the Bar Foundation came in to support the deal and provided equity capital, right? So that it could also subsidize this. So a lot of people played really unique roles, right? And we were sort of, I think, with City Life and CED, the Center for Economic Democracy, sort of the, I don't know, the ones that coalesced and helped to convene and helped to shepherd a lot of these players, but also push for more impact. So this deal now it's permanently affordable. The depth of the affordability is at 20, 30, 20, 40, 60, 80% AMI. So it's very, very affordable. It's in its third year, right? So as the leases of those students have come up, they've been putting families back. The wait list is 500 people to show you what the need is, right?
Yeah. Wow.
For this kind of housing. And then what's really exciting is that it's spurred interest now from sellers. So there are other transactions in the city and in Massachusetts where, you know, the owners that hold portfolios that are of this scale, right? 20 buildings, 30 buildings, 100+ units, they're thinking about selling to community.
Wow.
The issue we have is capitalizing these transactions, because to make them affordable forever, they need grants, they need subsidy, right, for them to work. And this is a conversation that's starting to emerge with the Boston Foundation and others of how do we aggregate the kind of capital necessary to do these, what we call NOAA deals, right? Naturally occurring affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows for community to buy them, right? Because we don't want another developer buying these. What we want is community organizations to be able to purchase these, or even tenants. Like what City Life is doing is also raising a fund that would allow tenants to purchase these properties. And that's real community power.
Wow.
Yeah, because
You know,
when a business transitions to worker ownership, I know a lot of times the business itself is allowed to take out that financing, is allowed to go to a bank, take out a loan. The business owner leaving is able to essentially take the check or take part of it in installments, and then the business is the one actually paying back that loan. But you're saying for a housing deal like this, you'd have to have an additional kind of party to do that would be willing to do that type of lending. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, well, in that East Boston deal, the owner stayed in for a little bit of time, right? So like to your point, where you have employee transitions, the best ones are where the owner is very patient, right? It's like they're getting employees are buying their share slowly over time. You know, so if you have a seller that's willing to stay in a little bit longer, like get them most of their money out, but stay in for just a little bit for, say, that last 5%, that's even better. It helps to stabilize the transaction even more. But we're talking about grant capital also to keep the affordability very deep, right? That's grants are for.
Wow.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I know one of our joiners here, Stephen Schaff, who's joined us a couple times now. He had a question. Stephen, would you like to unmute?
Yeah. Once again, another great topic and great change agents on this call. I became familiar with BII through the writings of Michael Schumann. So when I read about you, I thought, great, you know, I've been in the trenches for literally decades, and we could use plenty of BIIs. So your main focus is really to help aggregate capital in an innovative way, and that's very exciting. I'm sure you have plenty of opportunities. My question is, how do you, after you aggregate the capital, what is your process for determining which projects in the community are worthy of your interest, and also how do you vet them? Do you do conventional underwriting? What is the process for working with community or on the ground developers?
That's a great question, Stephen. And you know, we do both with real estate transactions and small business transactions. It's a similar process, although, you know, we have to sometimes bring in different levels of expertise, you know, given the different transactions. But I would say generally, you know, we're using an underwriting process that we feel is entrepreneur friendly, is very relationship based and trust based. So we're doing underwriting that is not taking credit scores. We are forming a relationship with the business owner. I'll talk through a little bit about business owner, and then we can get to real estate as well. But we're forming a relationship with the business owner, really understanding the underlying you know, drivers of the business. And they don't come in having filled out an application for a $250,000 term loan, right? They come in, have a conversation with us, and we learn about their business. We learn about their challenges. We learn about the opportunities for growth and why they want to take on, you know, a certain amount of capital. And then we work together with them, essentially in a form of technical assistance or capacity building, to help them prepare and understand, like, what type of capital is really best for them. Like, would it be better to have a revenue-based loan? Would some kind of equity or longer term, you know, patient debt make more sense than this term loan that they thought they needed to apply for because that's the only thing that CDFIs and banks offer? So we work with them and make sure there's kind of capacity built on their end. And we're also, you know, taking them through, you know, so we collect financials, we're looking at projections. If they don't have projections, we will work with them and help them create those. We're learning a lot about the sector. So because we're sector agnostic, we're generalists. I work on a team of, you know, four other investment professionals, you know, impact investment professionals. And we have various levels of expertise in different areas, but sometimes there's an area that we haven't seen before. And so we might, you know, call on our investment committee members, we might call on other outside experts, you know, if it's a climate tech business, or other type of, you know, if it's a worker-owned cooperative, we might call our friends at the CFNE and ask them some questions. So we're often, you know, using our web of relationships to make sure we really understand the business well. And then they pitch to our investment committee. And then there's a decision-making process there that includes our board members as well. But I'll mention that, like, it's not your traditional underwriting of, you know, kind of the 5 C's of credit, credit scores, and those types of things. We're really basing this in relationship.
So it sounds like a much more deep dive process, pre-development on your side. Is there a cost to your prospective on the ground collaborator, or just another part of your mission?
This is a part of our mission. And oftentimes, even if we're not moving forward with the transaction, we are, you know, giving them everything that we've developed together, making sure that they understand the financial projections and connecting them with other capital providers that might be more suited to the type of capital that they need or the stage that they're at. But no, there's no cost. We also don't charge origination fees or other types of fees like that. It's just, you know, closing costs. We don't charge those as well.
They're very critical and valuable resources that prevent some really good projects from taking off because of that initial kind of savvy they need from organizations like yours. So it's exciting. Look forward to seeing you in every major city in America that could use you.
Well,
Yeah.
I would say, you know, we don't have an expansion mindset. We have more of what you'd call like a translocal mindset. So we're thinking about, how do we work with other local community-based funds that are emerging in Dallas, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in Atlanta, Georgia, in different places, across the Southwest for Indigenous communities that are already working and know those communities, because we don't know those communities. So I can't go there and pretend to know how to invest there or how to form relationships there, but they do. And so we have our fund manager training program for emerging fund managers, mostly women and people of color who have been through our training. We have worked with, I think we're finishing up this week, and there's more than 60 fund managers who have been trained. We have 18 funds that have been launched, getting close to $9 million that's been deployed among them. And these are first time small funds, but there's some traction, there's some work being done. And it's really exciting also to see other organizations like Transformative 25 and others that are doing work to showcase, and the Impact Finance Center doing work to showcase emerging fund managers in this community-based investing space, because they all need the attention and need to be able to raise the money to deploy in their communities. So thank you, Stephen.
All good information. One last quick thing. So then you also can provide support and assistance to funds, small funds that are being developed.
Yes.
Yeah. So we back in 2020, when Deborah was looking at, do we launch a second fund? We're getting requests from different leaders to get supported with funds they want to launch. People kept coming to us and saying, we want to launch a fund like BII. How do we do it? Right. And because we did not have this, like, oh, we're going to grow to $100 million fund and invest across America, right? Mindset. We said, but what we could do is share our learning. So BII is very transparent, right? About how we do our work, why we do our work. And so the fund manager program is really a compilation of our learnings of how do you design a fund? How do you even think about the needs in your community? All rooted in that sort of in Deborah's original systems change work, but then taking that to a point where we're sharing, how do you design a fund? We share our fund model. We help, with structuring how you want to make decisions. Like we have a representative investment committee and board, but there's some really democratic funds like UGMA, right? Which makes decisions are made by community members. So they're all very different, and they all, we're giving them models and tools so that they can decide how to best structure a fund in their own community. And so our program now it's a 4-month cohort-based program. We do have an application process to really find the managers that are committed to launching a community-based fund with a racial and economic justice lens, and that are ready, right, to do that within a year or year and a half. And so the curriculum is all based on what we've learned, on what we do. And many of them say, that is the best part of this. Like they can't get their hands on an investment policy. They don't know how to, do their offering memorandum. We share all of it. And then what's sort of next, right, is that there are 18 funds that have launched. Some of them are very small, as Aliana mentioned, but there's some that are going to fund too, like Black Farmer Fund started with $1 million pilot, deployed that, learned from it, is now raising 20 million, right? So there are our role to play now, right, for these funds is to help connect them to capital, to help continue supporting them through their journey of building the fund, because they have the same struggles we all do, right? They're mostly nonprofit funds. They also have to raise money for operations, right? And so how do you find the kinds of investors to best support these community rooted, capital initiatives. So our journey at BII is going to, continue investing through Fund 2, but also exploring how we now support this emerging community of practice of community-based funds. And that would include launching a fund of funds to support them, perhaps starting a fund incubator, right? To incubate them, give them the deeper resources, legal, accounting, back office, fund structuring, so that they can launch faster and launch successfully. And then building our team, our capacity, right, to do this work at a larger scale. Because we believe, right, to really fuel the regenerative and solidarity economy, we have to have more capital allocators that are investing in these transformative types of transactions, right? Alternative ownership deals, but we need more of us out there in different communities, and we need, our larger ecosystem of wealth holders and wealth owners to move money towards these efforts.
Excellent work, and thank you for your comments.
Yeah, thank both of you so much. It's been a real pleasure, really enlightening and really energizing conversation to have you both on today, both Betty Francisco and Aliana Pinheiro from the Boston Impact Initiative. So this has been Community Capital Live, a partnership of the Main Street Journal, Impact Alpha, Neighborhood Economics, the Eagle Market Street Development Corporation, and the Mindful Marketplace Show. To see past and future and this episode, go to YouTube, type in Mindful Marketplace Show, and go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Until next time, everyone take care of yourselves and take care of someone else.
Thank you so much. This is great. Bye-bye.
Thank you.